Hi, my name is Anthony Miller, and welcome to this edition of the Corporate Corner. In this edition, we're going to talk about expecting more from your expectations. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been in trouble with somebody or had somebody upset with you and you had no idea why? Well, the reason that's happening is because you violated an expectation that that person had of you that you didn't know existed. And quite frankly, a lot of times when somebody's upset with us and we don't know why they're upset, a lot of times they don't realize that you violated an expectation that they had of you. Now, fellas, I'm going to give you a piece of advice here because I've talked to people about this before. The guy runs home, he's all excited, and he says to his wife when he gets home and she's upset about something and he doesn't understand why she's mad, he always says, "Hey, little honey, I obviously have violated an expectation that you didn't know existed, and that's not fair to get upset with me." I'm telling you right now, that's not going to work. It's a bad idea. But what is going to work is understanding that somebody's upset with us because we violated that expectation, trying to identify what that expectation is that we violated, and then making sure that we don't violate it again. So what are we supposed to do though? How do we try and identify these expectations before we end up violating, before we end up in that situation where we're in trouble and we're trying to figure out how to make things better? Well, one of the best ways that I've identified to get better at understanding other people's expectations of us is to get really good at defining expectations on our own for the other people around us. Now, as managers and as leaders, there's lots of different opportunities where we really can practice defining expectations for other people. And I want to talk about three specific areas where I see a lot of opportunity with all the people that I work with to really start improving how we're setting expectations for those that we work with. One of the first areas where we can really improve is with delegation. One of our most critical elements as managers, as leaders, is really to delegate to people because we can't get everything done on our own. Well, there's two types of expectations that we can really improve on when we're delegating to people. The first one is the timeline for completing the task. Every single one of us is guilty of saying the following words to somebody. Just go ahead and get around to it when you have time. And we wait, and we wait, and we wait. And eventually we get so frustrated we have to go and talk to them and say, "Look, I asked you to get this done." And they said, "Well, I thought you told me that I could get it done on my own timeline." And well, you did say that. And now you're upset with them because they did exactly what you told them to do. If you need somebody to get something done on time, tell them exactly when you need it to get them, when you need them to get it done by. One time I had somebody who worked at a printer and they were upset because their employees kept waiting till the last minute to get the job done. And what their employees didn't understand was that sometimes chaotic things happen and things got really busy, and the manager was really afraid that if they waited till the last minute, they wouldn't be able to get it done if something else of higher priority came in. And now the situation's even worse. And so I asked the manager, I said, "Well, when do you tell them to get it done by?" And she said, "Well, I tell them when the project's due." And I said, "Okay, well, just tell them you want the project done 2 days before it's due, and then you won't have a problem." So sometimes we just don't think through that. We have to tell them when we want to get it done. Don't let the employee decide for themselves when they're going to get it done, unless that's the situation where it's okay for them to do that. Now, the other place where we can really do probably a better job of setting expectations is how often we're going to be checking in with somebody. I was talking about this in a class of mine in San Francisco, and about really defining and telling the person how often you're going to be checking in with them. And this guy got really upset with me. He got really mad. He was raising his hand. He was obviously visibly upset. And so I went over to him. We started talking in front of the class, and he said, "I did exactly what you're saying, and I told my employee that I would be checking in with them, and they still got mad at me." So I asked him how long the project or the task was that this person was working on, and he said that it was about a 6-month software development project. And I said, "Okay, well, how often did you tell him that you're going to be checking in on him?" And he said, "Well, I told him every once in a while I'd be checking in on him." And I said, "Okay, so how often was every once in a while? How often were you checking in with the person?" And he said, "I was checking in with him every 2 days." And the entire room, there was probably 50 or 60 people in this class, the entire room started busting up laughing because this guy was so upset, but at the same time, he had this really unreasonable expectation that he'd be checking in every 2 days on a 6-month project. Now, if he would have told the employee, "Look, I'm going to check in with you every 2 days," one, the employee might not have been as upset by that, or two, If he would have said that to the employee and said, does that seem like it's okay with you? Does that seem like a good idea? Or can you understand why I would need to check in with you every couple of days? They could have talked about it and figured it out right then. But the reality was that he didn't define that expectation well enough with the employee, and so the employee got upset with them. Now, one of the other areas where we can improve our defining of expectations for our employees is in the hiring process. Especially when you've got high turnover positions, or if you've got a position where you typically run into the same problem every single time you bring somebody new into this position. The onboarding process, when you're training somebody, when you're teaching about your company culture, is a really great time to define those expectations. So this idea of pre-calling is simply that. It's saying, okay, now one of the things that we've run into in the past at our company is problems with cell phone usage. So here's our cell phone usage policy, here's our expectation, here's the consequence for violating that expectation. That's called pre-calling. Now, there's a variety of things that we can pre-call. We could pre-call, we already said phone usage, internet usage is another one, attendance policy, so when are you late, where do you have to be when your shift starts, how are you clocking in or clocking out, behavior expectations, how you expect people to deal with conflict and dress code, how are we anticipating or expecting that you're going to dress. All of those things are really great things to have in that onboarding conversation, great things to pre-call. Now, some people that I give this advice to say, well, we give them an employee manual and all of those things are lined out in the employee manual. And that's great, but the problem is that, believe it or not everyone's going to read the employee handbook. Also, another problem that you might run into is that people might not fully understand the employee handbook. And probably more frequently than any of the other issues that you might run into with handbooks is that employees might have questions that they don't ask. And so those questions never get answered. I think it's great to have employee handbooks. I think it's an awesome idea. What I'm encouraging you to do is to make sure that you really sit down with the employee, make sure they understand what's in the employee handbook, and really focus on those expectations that you have of them that you know have historically been problems. Now, the third and perhaps the most painful area where we can get better at defining expectations is when it comes to the discipline process. The reason somebody gets into trouble in the first place or when they're going through the disciplinary process is because they violated an expectation that we had of them. Hopefully the employee knew what the expectation was that they violated. Hopefully it's not a big surprise to them that they're being disciplined for something. But the reality is the reason they're being disciplined is because they violated an expectation. And so we have to get really clear on what the expectations are for that employee, because either they willingly violated that expectation for some reason or they weren't clear enough on the expectation. Now, the tendency when we get into a disciplinary situation is to get out of that situation as fast as we can. A lot of people perceive a disciplinary action as conflict, and at best, disciplinary actions are really uncomfortable conversations. But it has to be that. It has to be a conversation where you're not only defining that expectation, but making sure that they understand that expectation, making sure that you're answering any questions that they might have about the expectations that you have on them. And then the last area under discipline that you really need to do an outstanding job of defining expectations is what are the next steps? So if you violate this expectation again, here's what's going to happen. We call this progressive discipline, where there's a plan in place where the employee knows that if they do this action, it's going to lead to this consequence. Frankly, it takes a lot of pressure off of you as a manager and as a leader if you know that you have something they're supporting you that the employee already knows about. You guys have already come up with your game plan. You've really defined that expectation. It's crystal clear what that expectation is and how that employee might violate that expectation and what you're going to do if that happens. Really, it's a really great idea to really define those expectations using that progressive discipline model. Now, the better you get at defining expectations, whether it's in delegation, whether it's in hiring, whether it's in discipline, the better you get at that, then the better you're going to be able to identify other people's expectations of you. So when somebody's upset with you and you have no idea why, you're going to understand that it's an expectation that was violated, and you're going to be able to ask the right questions. And here's the best part. I say the best part for last. The best part of getting really good at defining expectations for other people is that the likelihood of somebody meeting your expectations goes up substantially. This has been another edition of the Corporate Corner. I'm Anthony Miller. You can reach me at anthony@steppingstonesolutions.com if you have any feedback, questions, or suggestions for future content ideas for the Corporate Corner. I'd love to hear them. Until next time, thank you very much.